Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our bi-monthly EMAT webinar. I'm Hallie Frazee. I'm going to just do a quick intro here, and then we'll let our speaker take it away. Today's webinar is going to focus on a topic that all of us have been facing, burnout. 2020 has pushed all of us, while we have risen to meet the needs as emergency management professionals, the constant and ongoing response are wearing down our teams and, of course, ourselves. We need to be taking care of ourselves. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone on the webinar is automatically muted except for our speaker. You'll be able to unmute yourself to ask questions at the end of the webinar. We will be recording the webinar and it'll be available on our website in a few days. During the Q&A, we ask that you submit your questions to the chat box and our moderator will work with our speaker to get those answered. And last of all, welcome to our EMAT members and any non-EMAT members on the webinar. We hope you consider joining and we're happy to have you. So our speaker today is Jennifer Battle. She's the Director of Access at the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD in Houston, Texas. She oversees the Harris Center Access Center, which includes the Access Line and Crisis Line, which serves as the crisis line for 39 Texas counties, as well as a regional provider of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Battle supervises the Southeast Texas Regional Suicide Care Support Center and the Harris Center Community Outreach Department. In collaboration with the Houston Police Department, Houston Fire Department, and Houston Emergency Communications Center, she supervises the 911 Crisis Call Diversion Program, the first program of its kind in the United States. The Harris Center has stood up a 24/7 statewide COVID-19 mental health support line, as well as some free virtual support groups for all of the frontline workers, which includes emergency managers for the state of Texas. In addition, on top of all of that she does, Jennifer is also on the board of the National Association of Crisis Organization Directors. So Jennifer, we got your intro. I'm going to let you take it away with your presentation.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. I'm guessing that there's probably a few sleepy people logging in today, so I appreciate everybody being here. This is definitely an exciting time, right? So there's no lack of things to do and projects to work on and hours to work and shifts to fill. So I appreciate the time that y'all are spending here today. And I hope that something that we talk about is helpful to you. And if you're a leader or manager, I hope there's some things here that are helpful for you to take back to your team. My goal for today is helping you recognize the signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue and burnout, and then identify ways to ensure resiliency and ensure compassion satisfaction. And then identify self-care and self-compassion strategies. So for those of you who may be from Harris County, you'll probably be familiar with the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD. For those of you from other parts of the state, I work for the local mental health authority. There is a local mental health authority that serves every county in the state of Texas. Some local mental health authorities serve multiple counties. There's 39 local mental health authorities in total across the state. Obviously, the Harris Center is the largest one because we serve Harris County, which is the largest county. And this will just kind of give you a little bit of an idea of our volume, as well as some of the different types of programs and services that we provide. We obviously serve people who need mental health care and support, as well as people who need care for intellectual and developmental disabilities. Here in Harris County, we're also the provider of all mental health services within the Harris County jail system. And we have multiple different collaborations and programs that we share with many of our first responders, including Houston Police Department, Harris County Sheriff's Department, and Houston Fire Department. So as you just heard, one of my programs that I run is our Access Center. So we're available 24/7, 365. This team is answering approximately 2,300 calls for service a month for those Texas counties. Gives you an idea of how many staff that we have across those various Access Center programs, and then our work that we're doing for the 20 counties across the state for National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And then just wanted to give me a little cred with this crowd, as we are familiar with working with some of our first responders and emergency management folks. I do have a team of people that are co-located inside of the Houston Emergency Communications Center, which is where the City of Houston 911 Center and our emergency responders, many of them, are located. And so this team is really exciting. They're working side by side with our dispatchers for City of Houston, as well as Houston Police Department and Fire Department. And their ultimate goal is to catch non-imminent risk mental health related calls and just handle them so that first responders don't even have to go out to the scene. So this is really exciting, and having them located working directly out of the computer-aided dispatch CAD system also allows them, if they are talking to someone and they determine that there needs to be a police or fire response, because we're in the center and we're side by side, all we have to do is literally put it back in the CAD and the response can still go out. But we divert about 2,500, 2,700 calls a year away from police department and fire department right here in the city of Houston. So we're very excited about that. And we do consultation just within the last maybe 4 months or so. We've done consultations with over 20 other cities and municipalities for places who are trying to start up teams like this themselves. And have really valued the time and expertise from what we've learned from our emergency responder partners in those programs. So I know this is probably a little silly question, especially today when everybody's probably really tired. But in general, are you feeling more tired than usual? Like you're having trouble sleeping, either not falling asleep or staying asleep, kind of lost interest in things that you used to enjoy, that they're just not bringing you happiness or fulfillment the way that they used to. Are you having an intense sense of loneliness? And loneliness doesn't just mean when you're by yourself. It could mean that even when you're with people that you care about or that are around you, that you feel alone, like maybe people don't understand you, or that they don't want to understand you. Are you feeling more irritable than usual? Irritability can look like maybe fussing at people more than you might normally, getting really angry or frustrated more quickly than you might normally, unable to focus. So maybe you're working on tasks, maybe you're trying to do paperwork, maybe you're trying to plan or organize and you're easily distracted. Or maybe you're just forgetting things. Maybe you were supposed to be at a meeting that you forgot about, or you were supposed to turn in some kind of paperwork or documentation that you forgot about, or maybe there was something that you were supposed to do for your family or your kids that you forgot about. So if you are having those feelings, you are not alone. There was a study that was done toward the beginning of the pandemic that we're currently, of course, in the middle of. This was back in April, and even at that point, Kaiser Family Foundation poll found that nearly half of adults in the U.S. Reported that their mental health had been negatively impacted, and that was just due to specifically to questions around the pandemic and the COVID situation. So when you put that type of data along with just the regular everyday stress that you experience as somebody who works in emergency and crisis services, you have your regular stress, right? Just the stress of going out on the calls that you go on, long shifts, maybe having to work overtime because other people are ill or calling out, too many shifts, higher than usual call volume, or what we're experiencing is not even, yes, more call volume, but also just higher acuity. So people are sicker than they have been because they're avoiding going in for care or things along those lines. too few people available, which we talked about. Most of us already work in a staffing deficit, meaning that you probably don't have enough people in your department to start with, much less whenever you have people who are ill or calling out. So it puts us at even more of a staffing deficit. That there may be increases, or it's just the general day-to-day challenges of dealing with people who are presenting in a really difficult way, or really difficult and challenging cases, as I talked about before. And then the general just stress around the risks that you face as your regular day-to-day work goes. There's also this interesting thing that people in crisis and emergency response work have, which is this idea that you aren't allowed to be vulnerable, that you feel like you have to really present yourself in a way that looks fearless, and they're using the word here, invincible. And then we also know that just the work of doing emergency response work can lead to having some trauma, and that there's also a lot of folks that go into emergency service work, as you are well aware, who are veterans and who have done a lot of work that could lead to a general overall potential diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So you have all of the new stuff with the pandemic, and then all of the regular stuff because you picked a really difficult and challenging work life. And then you have also all of the things in the personal life, which I'm sure many of you are now also having maybe children at home full time who are doing homeschooling or virtual schooling. You may be concerned for older parents or relatives who are in nursing facilities, or you may have brought people home to live with you during this time. So you may be concerned about the economy or finances, maybe from your partners, people who are maybe having problems with their field or their job. So a lot going on. So one of the things that we talked about in preparation for this workshop was that although when I list out all of those things that are stressors, you're probably looking at them going, check, check, check. This is so obvious. Of course, these are stressors. When you're in the middle of the work, you oftentimes don't recognize that these are things that are stressors, right? Because you're so focused on doing the work. And the work that you do requires attention to detail. It does require a lot of focus. And so you may sometimes be already kind of like up to here with your stress level, and you may not even recognize that it's happening. Or maybe your stress level, you're managing it okay, and you're kind of keeping your head above water, but that you're so focused on keeping yourself functioning that maybe you're not seeing what's happening to your colleagues around you as clearly as you might, where things a little bit less stressful overall. So we talked about just sort of putting a moment in time where we actually say out loud and talk about some of the signs that you might see or hear or feel for yourself or for the people that are around you working in your units or departments, so that we can make an effort to, in the middle of this chaos, be able to see and pay attention to people who might be struggling around us. So signs that your colleague might be feeling distress. There's lots of different sort of areas that we kind of bucket these signs of distress into from a behavioral health perspective. So I'm going to talk about 4 different areas. The first I'm going to talk about are emotional reactions. So as a society, we're not really great at talking about emotions, or we're kind of okay with it as long as they fall into what we would consider sort of a comfortable emotion range. For example, if you are a man and you are somebody who's feeling really overwhelmed with the amount of work and what you're seeing in the workplace, and you were to cry in front of colleagues, there might be a fear or concern that you would have that your colleagues would not take that seriously and that they might joke or harass you for showing that sort of emotion. And so, and that's a societal issue, right? That's an issue that we've said, you know, it's not okay for men to show that type of emotion. If you are a woman and you're very, very angry about anything, something, whatever it is, and you share that anger in a way in front of colleagues or work folks, they may think like, oh, that's not okay, you know, that's unladylike behavior or whatever, that we might judge or harass somebody for sharing that type of emotion because they're outside of the norm of what society has kind of said, these are the okay emotions people have. But what we know is in our, like individually, is that everybody experiences all kinds of emotions all the time. And so we know that it's not weird to feel angry or sad or anxious or scared. But what we do know is that we sometimes are worried or nervous about having and sharing those feelings with other people. So when you're in a situation where you may be experiencing compassion fatigue or burnout, it's when those emotional reactions are getting harder and harder for you to control internally, right? Like, so I might have those feelings by myself when I'm at my house and then kind of reset my face and then go back out into the workplace. But I may, when I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed and burned out, I may not be able to wait till I get home, right? I may be having more of these emotions in the workplace. And then people aren't sure what to do about that because we're not used to seeing a lot of people having a lot of emotions, especially crisis responders, right? Because there's a lot of value in crisis responders being able to stay what we would consider very stoic, very focused in the work moment, because it could be distracting to the people around and to your colleagues and to yourself to really dive into emotions. So those are some things that you may see and hear and experience with people around you or for yourself when you talk about sort of these emotional reactions related to compassion fatigue and burnout. The physical, or the fancy word, somatic reactions, are all the stuff that we hold inside of our bodies that make us tense when we're experiencing stress, right? So, you know, hopefully you're paying attention to your blood pressure and keeping that in check. That if not, it can lead to headaches. Stress and tension can lead to headaches. Stomach ailments, stress can really lead to problems in your GI tract. You can find yourself often when you're dealing with a stressful or difficult situation holding your breath. And so the problem with holding our breath is that we're depriving our brains of oxygen, right? And we oftentimes are holding our breath during times when we really need to be at our most critically minded, meaning that we're needing to, especially emergency responders, right? Quick, fast decisions, you know, life and death decisions sometimes. So when we hold our breath, we get into a situation where you're not oxygenating yourself in a way that's giving your brain response power. So you'll hear me all the time talking about the power and the importance of intentional breathing, which I know like sounds a little bit silly when you say it because you're like, I breathe all the time. That's what I do. I wouldn't be, you know, my body takes care of that for me. Well, again, just kind of track yourself in stressful situations and see if you're holding your breath. And then practice, even when you're not in a stressful situation, just in general, practice some intentional breathing. And intentional breathing sounds just like in for 5, out for 5, right? And so if you practice that over time, it'll become natural and normal to you so that when you are in a stressful situation, you can really focus on your breath and keeping yourself, it'll help you stay more focused. Let's see, behavioral reactions. So this can look like what I talked about before, right? Just feeling kind of out of sorts, feeling really irritable, kind of grumpy, more than your usual, right? There's some people who are like, I'm just a grumpy person. True, right? But in general, like whenever you're feeling really stressed or really burned out, you are quick to respond, right? So when you're not feeling burned out and you're not having compassion fatigue, maybe you're better at listening, because you're able to focus more, right? So if you're not using all of your listening skills, you may miss things. You may be telling people to repeat things, or you may just want people to do things faster than they're doing it. Again, when you're a crisis responder, you're used to things getting done quickly and efficiently, and you need things to go. So when you feel oftentimes that people may not be doing things as quickly and efficiently as needs to be done, then when you're on the precipice of burnout or feeling fatigue, you can really kind of feel argumentative and frustrated. And it may lead you to not being a team player, because sometimes that can also be moving kind of bleeding into the cognitive reactions. It can lead you to believe that, like, well, I'm the only person on my team who does anything right, and so I'm not going to ask anybody for help because I'm the only person who knows how to do this, and everybody else on my team doesn't know what they're doing, and they're not good enough. And so those type of cognitive and behavioral reactions are not good for the requirements of a lot of emergency responder work, which is working together and working collaboratively to get the best positive outcome for yourself and for the people that you serve. The cognitive reactions are those memory impairments, like you can't remember how to do something that you've done 100 million times before, and you can't understand why you can't do it, or that forgetfulness. Maybe in the old days you were able to, I know some people take notes on calls and some people don't. Some people have to do logs and some people don't. But it could be that, in the old days you were able to kind of like, not have to work on all your paperwork immediately because you could remember all the details later. And now you're finding yourself not really able to do that. And if you don't write down the details somewhere quickly, you'll find yourself unable to have good recall. That has absolutely everything to do with stress and burnout as well. So without recognizing those symptoms and being able to really kind of dive in and acknowledge that they're happening, it really can lead you to this place of having this sense of emotional exhaustion. When it's time for you to go into your shift, you're just like, ugh. You went into this work because you were passionate about it and because it was exciting and you felt good at the end of every day. You were like, yes, I'm in the right place. I'm doing the work that I'm supposed to do. I'm really good at this. But when you're experiencing burnout, you may question that, and you may say, do I really care about these people? If people would just fill in the blank, if people would just do whatever, then I wouldn't have to be on this call, right? If people would just act better, right? If people would make better choices, and then you just get angry and you have this sense of diminished caring. And it can have that sense of demoralization as well, which is sort of like, what's the point? What's the point of all this work? There's too many calls. There's too many people in crisis. Is the work that I'm doing make a difference? Does it matter? And that's how you lead to burnout. And then that's also how you end up with this concept of what's called secondary or vicarious trauma. And that means that you are taking on the characteristics of the trauma that you're witnessing. So it means not necessarily that a traumatic incident has happened to you personally, but that the witnessing of those traumatic incidents and in conjunction with some of the symptoms of burnout, like the diminished caring and the ability to kind of process that trauma, you take on those same sort of reactions that the person who experienced the trauma has. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So as we mentioned before, those signs of burnout, apathy, those people that are coming to work now that don't really seem to want to be there, and they seem to have a bad attitude when they're there. They're seeming just like, kind of, you go, why are they even here? That could be a sign of burnout. It could feel like I'm not, if you don't feel good at your job anymore, if you feel like you're making a lot of mistakes, if you feel like at the end of the shift, in order for you to cope and be able to come back to work the next day, you feel compelled to use drugs or alcohol in order to what you would consider to like kind of reset yourself and steel yourself for the next shift, for the next day. Those are all signs of potential burnout. Signs of secondary stress, when you're so worried or nervous about going out on a particular call or dealing with a particular type of situation, that it can cause you to not respond to the way that you would like to. Feeling like you have that you're like really easily startled or scared, or like the fancy word for it is called hypervigilant. Like if you're just kind of like always waiting for something bad to happen, your body is sitting in a kind of a chemical state of just hyper awareness, and so that's not good for you. And so that causes increases in stress hormones, which can also cause you to overeat, and it can cause you not to be able to sleep. So there's a lot of really negative things that can happen with that hypervigilance. And then another sign of secondary traumatic stress could be, again, difficulty sleeping because you're having intrusive thoughts or nightmares about things that you've seen or witnessed. And then sometimes it can take on like, it's not necessarily the scene that you witness, but you can insert your friends and family into those situations. Like you're seeing that in your head, and you're not able to sort of step outside of that scenario and function without being able to have those intrusive thoughts. So, which you can see, all of them kind of work together, right? So the more that you maybe be sitting inside of a situation experiencing secondary trauma and thinking like, I'm so worried something bad is going to happen, that you end up making mistakes, moving you closer to burnout, because then you're saying, oh, look at all these mistakes I'm making, I'm terrible at my job, when it really is all of these things that are kind of working together. So that was a lot, right? A lot of scary things. And you probably in the back of your head are saying, oh, I know somebody who is having some of these signs and symptoms, or I myself have been dealing with some of this. Or it could be that maybe you've dealt with some of this in the past, and that you were able to overcome it, and that now you can really be a support for other people in your unit or in your department. So we've talked about all the big stuff. So now we take a big intentional breath and we say, okay, so what do we do about it? Recognition is important, right? That's one of the things we said we wanted to do today, was look at recognizing. So what do we do? Because I know you are all action-oriented people. You want to do things. So awesome. So prevention is, number one, connection to the mission. Remember why you do this work. What was it that made you decide to come in to do emergency response work, right? There's way easier things that you could have chosen to do, right? Like you chose this and there was some reason why. And it usually had something to do with that sense of being helpful, feeling committed to serving your community. It's okay to like the excitement that's involved in that sense of like you're doing something different every day. You never know what the day's going to hold for you, but you do know typically for those of us that do crisis work or emergency response work, that it's difficult to get to the end of the day without feeling like you actually helped somebody. And I know for me that I have one of my beliefs and connections to the mission is I have a very short amount of time on earth. So I want to make sure that I help as many people as I can along the way, because many people have helped me. And that's, I'm guessing maybe for some of you that's where you are too. So really as leaders, managers, or supervisors, one key thing to keep in mind here is making sure that you're doing good mission checks with your team. You know, if somebody on your team has a really good call or really good outcome or a situation that went really well, share that with the whole team. Make sure, because somebody had a really bad day, right? Like somebody had a really bad call, and we want the team to see themselves as a whole. You know, that even on a day when you may have had a bad situation, there was someone else on the team that had a good one. And we want to make sure that the mission is the bigger picture here. So that helps us process and bridge over the days where things are feeling more difficult than usual. Another piece of prevention is really around this focus of resiliency, and I'll talk about resiliency in detail in just a second. And then the third component is a focus on personal wellness and self-compassion, which I'll talk about more in just a sec. So resilience, the process of adapting in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, and threats, or things that are significant amount of stress. Right? So basically your everyday work, right? So this is how you are already adapting to the work that you're doing. The really good news is that resilience isn't a thing that you are either born with or not born with. So it's not like you are, I've heard people say like, well, I'm not a resilient person, or they're not a resilient person. Well, the good news is how resilient you are. And sometimes we're more resilient than others, really depending on situations and scenarios. And so, you know, a lot of the work that you do as emergency responders is community-oriented work, right? Like I'm in Harris County, I'm in Houston. So when we have a hurricane or something like that and our community is impacted, then it's, as a person who lives in the community, then that's not only am I having to do the response, but I'm also having to deal with my own potential trauma or impacts, right? Whereas if the hurricane comes next door into Beaumont, then my personal life might not be as affected, so that I can really turn all my attention and emergency responder skills to my neighbors and really focus on just supporting them and what needs to happen there. So my resiliency and reactions will feel different depending on my personal impact. What's made COVID and the current pandemic so challenging is that it's a universal impact, right? So everywhere is affected. So when everywhere is affected, everyone is affected in a certain way. However, if you or your family has been personally impacted, then again, your resiliency is going to look a little bit different than somebody who has not had that personal connection as of yet. So that's how that works. So you can always look at and learn and grow and focus and practice your resiliency. And another really fantastic thing is that you can learn from the people that you work with. So you look at the people in your departments and in your units who are the people who who seem to, at least on the surface, have really interesting, like, and sort of positive work skills. And so you can look at that and say, I wonder what it is that they do in order to really come back every single day and be able to give that kind of 100% and give that focus when I'm sort of barely hanging on. And so it's good to talk to each other and learn from each other and see how other people are practicing and experiencing resilience. So some of the things that we know that contribute to a positive development around resiliency is having caring and supportive relationships. So that means both in your personal outside of work life as well as your inside work life, right? So this is where I talked earlier about where that feeling lonely or feeling isolated can be a really big contributor to burnout, because you really need connection. As human beings, we are actually created and designed to be connected. And so the more that we're isolated and the more that we feel like we're alone, that will definitely contribute to our stress and anxiety. But the key isn't just any relationship. The key is caring and supportive, right? So these are people that you need to be able to share some of your concerns and anxieties with, who will listen to that full range of emotions and allow you to process that. And the good news is that you can be that for other people as well. The second thing that really contributes to resilience is the ability to make realistic and specific plans that are step-oriented. So, you know, when you're feeling very, very stressed and on the precipice of burnout, you can get to that place where I call it the tornado of crisis. I don't know if anybody's ever watched Wizard of Oz, but in Wizard of Oz, the movie, there's this big tornado, and there's a scene where the main character gets sucked up into the tornado. And while she's sucked up into the tornado, she keeps seeing all the other things in her community basically being sucked up into the tornado. So there's a cow, and there's a lady on a bicycle, and there's, you know, all these things. So when we are in crisis, we're kind of like Dorothy in the middle of the tornado. Like, we are sucking everything else into crisis with us. And it can feel completely overwhelming and completely disempowering, and completely out of our control. So the best thing to do when you're in that tornado is to try to focus on the first closest thing that you can do. So if we can take one step toward, you know, an action plan, and then achieve that step, and then we take the next step toward the action plan and the next step. If we're looking way out on the horizon and we're trying to do something that's 20 steps from now, then it's highly likely that you'll continue to be overwhelmed and you won't be as successful, because you're just kind of potential to be frozen, right? So realistic plan, action steps, small steps. So let's see, a positive view of yourself and confidence in your strengths and abilities. So I hope I get the opportunity to meet some of you in person in the future. But if you've ever met me or know me, like, one of my biggest challenges is being around negative self-talk. So if I ever hear somebody say something like, oh, I'm so stupid, or I'm such an idiot, I can't believe I did that, I'm going to be like, boop, boop, boop. Like, no, we don't do negative self-talk, because you're not stupid and you're not an idiot. You are a smart and capable person who may have made a mistake. And the fact that you realize that you made a mistake is what makes you a smart and capable person, right? We're the really people that we're concerned about are people that aren't realizing that they're making all these mistakes, right? So when you realize that you've made a mistake and you've owned it and you've named it, you are a person who's practicing resiliency. So you wouldn't be in this work if you were not smart and capable, and if you were not able. However, you will make mistakes along the way. That is normal. It is not normal to assume that you will never make a mistake, right? And we know in this field that mistakes are dangerous, right? So you always want to do your best not to, but there will be failures along the way, right? So know that that is possible, but be prepared to manage that and learn from it, not to spend a lot of time beating yourself up about it, because spending time beating yourself up and not being confident in your skills and abilities will lead to more mistakes moving forward, and potentially lead to that burnout place and that place of potential secondary trauma, especially if there is a mistake that you did make along the way that led to a bad outcome, that you're going to really need to engage some outside support to help you process through that, so that you don't get stuck in that trauma place, and that you learn from it, and the ultimate goal is for that not to happen. Other factors that lead to resilience is having excellent communication skills. You know, listening internally to yourself, as well as listening externally to the people that you work with, your supervisors, your leadership, your colleagues, your peers, is going to really help you be better at your work and be more connected, and leads back to that first piece, which was having those really strong relationships. And then that capacity to manage the strong feelings and impulses. So the good news, again, is that just by the nature of you being in this work, you have that. If you weren't able to manage strong feelings and impulses, you would be doing emergency work. You know, for this crowd, it's really about, what do you do with those emotions and impulses after your shift? Like, how do you discharge those emotions and feelings in a healthy and productive way to be more resilient moving on? And guess what? I'm going to give you some ideas of how to do that. This is my most favorite thing. This is a totally free app. So I love it. I use this in my own crisis center. It's called My3, and you can download it, and there's a component in it that allows you to create intentionally your support system, because that's important, right? Like, who are the people that are important to you? Who are part of your support network? Build an actual safety plan for yourself. Now, My3 is designed specifically, when they talk about safety plan, they're talking about a suicide prevention specific safety plan, but the same exact components that you would use in a suicide prevention safety plan are the same components you would use in a stress management safety plan. So you can use it for all the things. But what it does is it asks you to really identify what the warning signs are for you whenever you feel like you're kind of maybe pushing toward that burnout place. And so all those things that we talked about before, remember, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, somatic, those are all the warning signs, right? So if I find myself not being able to sleep through the night, or having those intrusive nightmares, or every time I'm ready to go out on a shift, my stomach starts really hurting, or I get a really big headache. Those are warning signs that something isn't right. What are your coping strategies? So internal coping strategies are, what are the things that you can do for yourself? So these are, going to work out, going to exercise, whatever your thing is, going for a run, taking a walk, writing in a journal, whatever. Distractions are the things that we used to do when we could hang out with people, right? Like, hey, I'm going to meet up a friend with to grab a coffee or go to a movie or whatever. So we're having to be a little bit more creative these days with distractions. And so this is why it's really good to sit down and actually have a plan and ahead of time, so that when you're in the middle of what potentially could be a really stressful situation, you're not trying to brainstorm and think about what are the things that you want to do. You've already thought about it ahead of time. Your network means that, like, okay, so I know that my employer has an employee assistance program, and this is the main number to the employee assistance program. And when I've not been in crisis, I've reached out to my HR people, and I know that I can have up to 3 or 4 sessions for free through my employee assistance program. Or, hey, this is the number to my primary care physician because I'm really worried about my blood pressure or what have you. Or this is the number to my therapist because I'm having a particularly stressful time with that situation that I dealt with at work the other day, and I need an emergency session. So that's what that means, your network, that you have all those phone numbers in one place. So again, when you're feeling really overwhelmed, you aren't having to go dig around and look for it. It's already there. You did it when you're not in crisis, and it's available to you right at your fingertips. And then the 5th piece is the safety piece, right? So again, this was built more specifically around suicide prevention. So when they talk about safety, typically they're talking about, well, if I'm, what are my access to weapons? What's my access to medication or things like that? So if part of your stress response includes suicidal thinking, then that's a really important part for you to put some thought behind. But it can also be for stress, and it could be around that healthy response, right? So if I know that when I'm feeling really stressed and I'm feeling on the precipice of burnout, that maybe I drink so much when I get home from work that I pass out, or that I have a blackout, or that I've drunk so much that I have a hangover the next day, or something along those lines. So you may want to say, I'm having a particularly stressful time at work right now, so keeping myself safe and healthy means not keeping that level of alcohol in my home, or that I'm worried that I'm going to take too many of these painkillers, or what have you, that I have in my bathroom, and so I need to have them in case, because I have an issue where I need them, but I'm going to put them in a lockbox and give the key to my partner or whatever. So some thoughtful way when you're not in crisis about what you're going to do to practice harm reduction and keep yourself as safe as you possibly can. So highly encourage this. This is a great tool. Leaders, it's a great tool for you to share with the people that work in their units. When we have people on the 2nd day of training actually create a safety plan, they can either do it in this app or they can do it as a hard copy. And then when the supervisors do regular check-ins with people as part of their quality assurance and performance improvement, we actually check in with them around like utilization of their safety plan. Like, have you been using it? Have you been feeling stressed? etc. The other thing that I really wanted to focus on was the concept of wellness and self-compassion. Self-compassion, you hear a lot of people talk about self-care, which is great. And self-care is exactly, all the things, right, that we talked about. How do you care for yourself? But self-compassion is a little bit deeper. And the deeper part of self-compassion, I think that really feeds prevention of burnout is that idea of you being kind to yourself, understanding that, like I said before, everybody makes mistakes. It's a common sense of humanity, right? Like everybody struggles at some point in their life. So it's not unusual for you to be struggling. There is no shame in the struggle, right? And that being mindful and focused around either like not catastrophizing situations and not under acknowledging situations, right? So, sit with the feelings, allow them to pass, and recognize that you are good at your work. You just may be kind of having a bump at the moment, but there are resources out there that will help you. Some of the best practices as a first responder for really focusing and trying to enhance that wellness and enhance that compassion is really, and I know you're probably looking at this, some of you are already laughing like, ha ha ha, this is so unrealistic. We work like 18-hour, 20-hour shifts sometimes, which I get, but that's part of the problem, right? When I talked about like, the staffing and the funding is never where to be, but trying to really look at your shift times and how long you're on shift, and at least having some kind of breaks in between back-to-back shifts, really working to try to limit the amount of time that you're working alone. And that's, again, comes back to that idea of the importance of working in partnership and in collaboration with someone else. Writing things out at the end of your shift of like how things went, so that you have just an outlet to kind of discharge some of those fears and anxieties that may have come up for you during a shift. This is interesting, talking to friends and family and teammates about your experiences. I'm sure that many of you have come home from a difficult shift and tried to talk to a friend, family member who doesn't do this work, and they look at you like you're, green and purple and your head's on fire, right? Because like what we see every day normally is stuff that other people like never even want to think about. So you've got to kind of be careful about talking to friends and family who may not be prepared for some of the messages that you're giving, or learning like how to kind of talk about it in a way that leaves out some of the details that are not shocking to you but could be shocking to others, which again comes back to this idea of not working alone on a shift and having debriefing kind of set up into your unit and department structure so that you have people that really understand the work that you do, and that the way that you talk about it is not going to come off as, like, I don't know, like macabre, or, the sense of humor that you have doing this work, or the way that is very different from people who don't do the work, right? So people sometimes might think that you're being coarse or inappropriate in the way that you talk about what you've seen and experienced, whereas your colleagues who are in that same space have an easier time kind of with maybe the language that you might use. We already talked about intentional breathing, trying really hard to stay healthy, and eat healthy things. If you think about your body like a car, you're not going to, go put like crappy fuel in your really good car, right? Like you're going to try to give it the best that it can because that's how you keep your engine running appropriately. Try to sleep. I know that that's hard, especially if you're working different shifts. So trying to keep a schedule as best as you can is going to be really helpful for sleeping. And also, I tell people sometimes, like, the more you focus on trying to make yourself sleep, the more trouble you have sleeping. So I often say, don't obsess about sleep, focus on rest. Like you can lay in your bed and rest and then not pressure yourself to sleep. So that's a key element there. It's okay to say no. I know that's so hard because you are all here to do the yes work, right? Like, yes, I'll pick up that shift. Yes, I'll help my colleagues. Yes, I'll be a team player. But sometimes you really have to say no because you're going to go into a shift tired and exhausted and potentially make mistakes. So, so supervisors, do your best not to put your team in that situation. But you also need to know yourself well enough to know when you need to say no. And then we've already talked about alcohol. I hesitate to even say limit caffeine. I'm glad I'm not in the classroom and you can't throw things at me right now. But it's a stimulant, you know, and I'm worried about sleeping, you know, it's not super helpful. So just don't throw things at the screen. So remind yourself it's not selfish to take breaks and care for yourself. It makes you a better worker with better outcomes. The needs of the survivors and the people that you serve are not more important than your own needs and well-being, right? Like in order for you to serve people in the best of your ability, you have to serve your own needs too, and that is not a bad thing. Working all the time doesn't mean that that's your best contribution. Being your best self while you're working is what makes it your best contribution. And I know that this is shocking, but you do not carry the full weight of the world on your shoulders. I'm going to say that again. You do not carry the full weight of the world on your very shoulders. You do have colleagues, you do have people that you work with that are there, and you work as a community, and you will get the job done. So here's a couple of resources. The Heroes Helpline, which is out of UT Health. It launched on April 1st. They have workshops, they have support groups, they have a response line, and this is all here for you. And I'm sending this email to the group, so she'll send it out and you'll have access to this because I'm gonna quickly go through. This is my program, so I know for a fact that it's awesome. So this is the virtual support groups for frontline workers anywhere in the state of Texas. So all you have to do is call through the COVID mental health support line. It doesn't have to be COVID specific, but it's a great opportunity to just be able to talk to people about what's going on. And then this is a national program called Safe Call. And so Safe Call is designed specifically for public safety employees and emergency service personnel. So it's another piece that's available for you. And this is a podcast that is hosted by Dr. Busser of the Houston Police Department. He's one of the staff psychologists. I work very closely with him on our Nurse Challenge for prevention of veterans military family suicide. And he put together this podcast with his daughter where they talk specifically about suicide prevention and first responders, and it is pretty fantastic. And thank you for the work that you do every day. I'm so grateful to live in the great state of Texas and to be supported and kept safe by everybody on this call. And this is my information. So if you have questions, I know I tried to leave at least a couple minutes for questions, but if you have questions that we don't get to today, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to talk to you. Let's see, one question. Do we have a recommendation on how often you should take breaks when working long hours? I will defer this to any of the leaders that are in here because I think a lot of it depends on the type of work and response work that you're doing. So I think that there's differences if you're doing like a physical response, if you're working like as an EMT, versus if you're doing kind of like dispatch work, if you're more in a sedentary position. So is there anybody on the call that has any research or best practices on this that you want to share with Elizabeth? If you do, and you want to send it out to the group later, that would be awesome. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I don't have a specific answer to that one. What else? Let's see, Molly says, along the same lines, any recommendations for rest recovery or rehab cycle for short or long term? Hearing more and more about sabbaticals for longer term. Again, like I don't, it's so different. This community has so many different kinds of responders. I would really rather defer that. It sounds like maybe a great topic for another workshop. To be able to really kind of focus on those rest and recovery cycles. I can tell you what we do on the crisis line is that we don't allow more than, our regular average shift is 8 hours. We don't allow anybody to work more than 10 hours in a row, and you can't work more than 6 days in a row. You have to at least take a shift off before you come back. But again, that's not like physical direct contact work. That's all telephonic response. Can you suggest some group type decompress activities? Absolutely. I think one of the best things ever is a debrief, like a shift debrief if possible. And that means like if you were in the luxury of like actual shift work, where people work 7 to 3 or something like that, and then the other team comes on at like 2:30 to 11 or what have you. That whatever that 30-minute kind of overlap time is between your end of shift and the next start of shift, is that everybody kind of like circles up and does sort of like anything that anybody needs to talk about after the shift today, it's good or bad, right? Like anybody have a really good call or anybody have a really bad call that you need to process, and then it's just allow people to kind of talk through what happened, because then it also sets the idea that this is the end of your work shift, right? Like you're done, and then now I need you to like take off your work hat and leave and go home and rest, so that when you're back here tomorrow or later tonight for another shift or whatever it is, that you're ready to start again. And so if you're in that type of luxurious situation where you can have both a start of shift kind of intel, like, hey, here's everything that's going on, here's what we learned from the previous shift, and then an end of shift, like, hey, how was your shift, debrief, it's like the perfect world. I know that not everybody can do that. If you can't, I also recommend maybe, especially now that we live kind of in Zoom land, scheduling sort of regular debrief times where you can say, hey, I'm going to be on a Zoom every Tuesday at this time, every Thursday at this time, and every Saturday at this time. Whoever wants to come on and do, a quick debrief or decompress session, jump on and make it a. I have some colleagues that work in another place, and they call it like a coffee talk. Like we're just going to be here, and people can come in and talk about whatever they need to. That's specific to work or situations, which has gone really, really well. Have I seen a trend in organizations requiring people to take off time on a regular basis? I have not. I've heard people talk about it, but I've never seen it actually in real life action. Has anybody here seen that, or any of your organizations doing that? We'll see. Again, I think this sounds like a really cool workshop. Please make sure to invite me back when you find somebody who can talk about those specific things. I really want to hear. Molly says, do we have any suggestions for leaders or managers who are already burned out, who are then in their place to try to help replenish other people so that they can lead and not set up a toxic environment? Molly, that is such a great question. You have to do all the things first. So all the things that we just talked about, you need to do them. And your staff learns and sees from you. So if you're working 1,000,000 hours and you're not going home and resting and you're not sleeping and you're not talking about your feelings and you're not modeling a wellness and if you're negative self-talking, if you are not, if you're just not modeling a healthy work environment, healthy work sense of self or work environment, then you're never going to expect your team to be able to do it. So you have to do it, right? And they need to see you doing it. You need to set the boundaries, and then do the work for yourself, and then you'll be able to do the work with your team. And that is so key. When it's just such a great question. If your leadership is not on board, then it's so difficult to get the team healthy. Other than I request they plan their vacations early, helps them to plan their work activities so major deadlines don't fall on that time. Also, psychologically, I think it helps us all to have something to look forward to. Yeah, so planning your vacations early so that you don't conflict. We keep a public calendar like on our website. So anytime somebody has anything that we have that's like department wide, or we know that people can't take off because there's holidays or what have you, then we have those blocked off on the calendar so that people don't even ask for it. And then as people have PTO or time off approved, we always put it up on the calendar. And then we ask people, before you even ask for time off, make sure you're checking the calendar, because, you know, if we already have the max number of people off for that shift, then we can't, there's no reason for you to even ask. And then we put the emphasis kind of back on them, which is like, you know, if you see somebody already has off, like, you're welcome to go to that person and say, is your time off flexible or is it hard? And if it's a hard no, then they can't do anything. But if it's flexible, like, oh yeah, I was just trying to burn some time, I needed to take a few days off, then, you know, they can say, well, could you start yours tomorrow instead of this day, or the next day instead of this day, so I can have this day off because I need to do this thing with my kid, or what have you. So we really try to help encourage that. And again, we've been doing that for years, and that's working pretty well for us. You know, there's always the potential for conflicts and, you know, last minute emergencies and what have you. So we have to manage that as it comes, but the public calendar has been very helpful. These are great. I say we're great time, but like I said, my email. So I'm happy to, you know, continue to talk if somebody wants to email me directly. And then I'll forward this PowerPoint so you have all the resources available to you moving forward.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for taking the time to talk with our members and our guests. We'll definitely get the PowerPoint, your contact, and the video of this webinar posted up on our website, and we'll let you guys know when it's up. Thank you for everyone for attending and all those who had some great questions. We'll see you guys in 2021 for our next webinar. All right, everybody, stay safe. Thanks.